All right, well, in my last video, I affirmed that I believe that there is such a thing as the natural. But I now want to ask the question of, can we derive a kind of set of political opinions from the idea of the natural? In other words, can we go so far as to say that because there is the natural that, well, now we can have some kind of social order based on our ideas of what's natural? And I think that that is where the question of the natural becomes problematic. If you start saying that if that such and well, let's say the question of eugenics. Eugenics would be based on someone's idea of the naturalness of evolutionary progress, and that must be affirmed in the social order that weak organisms don't reproduce. Well, what's the logical flaw in that? The logical flaw in that is that natural selection may be a very brutal progress, but what emerges from natural selection doesn't have to be brutal. What emerges from natural selection can be a society of equals, and a society of equality and justice and tenderness. What emerges from natural selection can be where there is pair bonding, and I would say that pair bonding and the biological family are natural. But that doesn't have to mean that inequality in that is natural. The idea that the father has all the rights is not natural. I don't believe that hunter-gatherer societies had a situation like that. The idea that parents can beat children every night is not natural. That will harm the development of children. So the idea of, I believe the idea of what is natural has to be separated from the concept of legitimation. I think that that's key. And that's a key caveat to my last video, because, yeah, I trampled on a few toes. I don't believe in, well, you know, let's say I don't believe in unconditional divorce. I know there are a few states that don't have that. I don't believe that in this, well, I don't want to go too far with this, okay, because, you know, it's not really where I want to go with this video series. I want to try to get to back to the question of universals, and I think it will actually be in my next video where I'll address the issue of Platonism in biology, and I might want to do a little research before I open my mouth and you know, say, misquote philosophers. Basically, I want to look into the chain of being and the kind of medieval notion of the chain of being, and try to understand it a little better than I do before I open my trap on it. But the idea, just to speak very generally about it, the idea that there is a chain of being that is Platonic in nature, that supersedes the actual, is not what I mean by natural. Natural does not imply legitimation of any social order, including an egalitarian one. When Rousseau and when people on the progressive end of the spectrum, or let's say anarcho-primitivists, or somebody tries to justify an egalitarian society where humans don't dominate humans and humans don't dominate other animals and we're all hunky-dory based on the idea of the natural, you can't do that, because in nature there is domination. In nature there are hierarchies. But I would also say at the very same time that it is not the case that what is implies an ought. And I would also say, if you look at the example of the chimp, well, for one thing, what is does not imply an ought. But for another thing, nature is an all hierarchy or domination. If you look at the example of a chimp, you see hierarchy and domination. If you look at the example of a bonobo, you don't. They only separated from one another about 2 million years ago. So, hence my skepticism about the idea of a chain of being, or the idea of what a, quote, natural order would look like. And also my skepticism about the idea that we can completely overturn technology and go back to the Pleistocene and become hunter-gatherers like some people want to do. It's not so much whether that's desirable or not as A, whether we can, and B, whether the Pleistocene was what people think it is. I tend to think that humans did shape the environment a great deal through controlled burns, through hunting certain animals. I mean, that would be my viewpoint on it. All right, so next one, I'm going to do Platonism in biology. I promise I will get to that. Stay tuned.